Welcome to the Unseen Whispers, where the stories linger long after the night fades. Before we dive into tonight's chilling tale, be sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Let us know where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you, because some stories feel different in the dead of night. Now settle in, get comfortable, and let's begin. Story 1. The Haunting of the Redwood Forest. The summer air hung thick with the scent of pine and damp earth as Ben, Emma, Lucas, Julia, and Ryan piled into the old Subaru. It was the kind of trip that promised adventure, freedom, and memories they'd cherish forever. At least that's what they thought. Ben, the de facto leader of the group, had organized the camping trip. He had grown up hiking, fishing, and exploring the vast forests that sprawled across California. To him, the Redwood Forest was a sacred place, majestic and awe-inspiring. For weeks, he had been eagerly preparing for this weekend getaway, boasting to his friends about how the towering trees would make them feel small, humbled by the grandeur of nature. Emma, the skeptic of the group, wasn't as enthused about the idea. She had always preferred the city, with its constant motion, noise, and familiarity. The deep woods where the air grew colder as dusk settled, and strange sounds echoed through the trees unnerved her. But she was here for her friends, and she didn't want to be the killjoy. Lucas, on the other hand, was all about the thrill. A bit of an adrenaline junkie, he couldn't wait to set up camp near the base of the tallest trees, build a fire, and share ghost stories that would make their hair stand on end. Julia, who was always the artistic one, was drawn to the beauty of the forest. She carried a camera to capture the serenity of the place, to document the towering redwoods that had stood for centuries, their massive trunks stretching upward like the fingers of giants. Ryan, quiet but reliable, had his own reasons for joining. His face remained unreadable as he stared out the window, the thick green canopy of trees slowly replacing the familiar landscape of the city. Deep down, he felt an unease, something gnawing at him, a feeling he couldn't quite shake. He kept it to himself, choosing instead to focus on the road ahead, unsure of what was to come. As they pulled deeper into the redwood forest, the sunlight began to dwindle, blocked by the dense canopy overhead. The towering trees stretched impossibly high, their bark rough and weathered, etched with the scars of time. The shadows grew longer, and the forest seemed to close in around them. "Last stop for supplies," Ben said, pulling over at a small isolated gas station. The dim glow of a flickering neon sign cast a sickly light on the gravel lot. A lone truck sat in front of the store, its engine cold, and the air around them felt heavier, almost suffocating. The others stepped out of the car, stretching their limbs as the wind whispered through the trees. It was the kind of eerie silence that made Emma's skin crawl, the silence before the storm. She quickly grabbed a bottle of water and a bag of chips, feeling an odd sense of foreboding that she couldn't explain. "Anyone else feel like we're in the middle of nowhere?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Ben laughed it off. "That's the point of camping, Em. We're getting away from everything, no distractions." But the elderly man who ran the gas station, his face wrinkled like old leather, his eyes clouded and distant, gave them a long, unsettling stare as they walked out of the store. "Careful in the woods," he muttered, his voice raspy. "Not all that roams there is friendly." Ben waved it off with a chuckle, but Emma felt a chill run down her spine. She couldn't help but glance back over her shoulder as they left the gas station. The man hadn't moved, still watching them as if he could see something they couldn't. They continued their drive, pushing farther into the forest. The winding road grew narrower, and the trees thickened, their twisted branches intertwining above like a canopy of black veins. The air felt heavier with each mile, the atmosphere dense with the weight of ancient history. "All right," Ben said, pulling the car to a stop in front of a secluded clearing. "This looks like the perfect spot." They unloaded the gear, laughing and joking as they set up camp. The fire crackled as they sat around it, the shadows of the trees stretching long behind them. The sun had disappeared, leaving a cool dusk in its wake. "I can't believe we're actually here," Lucas said, grabbing a marshmallow and holding it over the fire. "I've seen pictures of these trees, but they don't do them justice. You can feel the power of this place." Julia took out her camera and snapped a few photos, the flickering flames casting eerie shadows on her face. "It's beautiful, but kind of unsettling, don't you think?" Ryan said nothing, his gaze fixed on the edge of the forest, as though something unseen was lurking just beyond the firelight. His silence only deepened Emma's unease, and she found herself glancing nervously into the darkness, half expecting something to emerge from the trees. And then, just as the last of the sunlight disappeared, the forest seemed to shift. The wind picked up, its howling mournful and distant, almost like the cry of a lost soul. The fire sputtered, casting odd flickers of light across their faces, as though the flames were alive, dancing, warping, alive with a malevolent energy. "That's just the wind," Ben said, trying to sound reassuring, but even he couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't quite right. Emma's eyes flicked to the shadows at the edge of the clearing. There, among the trees, something moved, a shadow, indistinct but unmistakable. A pair of eyes glimmered in the darkness, too far to be real, but too close to ignore. "Did anyone else see that?" Emma's voice was low, her heart hammering in her chest. The others turned to look, but by then, whatever it was had vanished. "It's just your imagination," Ryan said quietly, though his voice lacked conviction. "The forest plays tricks on you." But Emma wasn't so sure. She couldn't shake the feeling that the forest was watching them, that they were intruding on something ancient and sacred. Ben shrugged and reached for another marshmallow. "Let's not overthink it. We're here to have fun." But the forest didn't seem to agree. As the night deepened, the air around the campfire grew colder. Ben's attempts to keep the conversation light seemed to falter as the shadows from the trees stretched further into the clearing. The whispers, faint but distinct, began to creep in, so soft that at first they could have been mistaken for the rustling of the wind through the branches. But the longer they sat, the clearer it became. The whispers were not the wind. "Did you hear that?" Emma asked, her voice tight. She pulled her jacket around her shoulders, suddenly feeling very small in the vastness of the forest. The fire crackled, but the warmth didn't seem to reach her. Ryan's gaze snapped to her. "What?" There's something out there," she whispered, trying to keep her voice steady. The group fell silent. Even Ben, usually the brave one, felt the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. They all listened, straining in the oppressive stillness of the night. There it was again, a soft murmur like distant voices, some of them pleading, others angry, but all muffled and unintelligible. Lucas stood up suddenly, his silhouette flickering in the firelight. It's probably just animals, or maybe a hiker. There's no one else here, Julia said, lowering her camera. I've been watching the trail. It's been empty for hours. Ben frowned. So, what do you think it is? Before anyone could respond, the whispers grew louder, more distinct. The voices began to sound like they were calling out to them, pulling them in, each word threading through the trees like a ghostly rope. Emma could hear them now. Leave this place. Ben stood up, his bravado slipping. Okay, this is getting weird. We should have stayed in a cabin or something. He forced a laugh, but his eyes darted nervously to the tree line. Another gust of wind blew through the trees, and this time the shadows seemed to shift. For a moment they looked like shapes, tall looming figures standing among the trunks just beyond the fire's reach. Did you see that? Julia asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Emma nodded slowly, her breath catching in her throat. The figures were gone as quickly as they had appeared, vanishing into the dark. Okay, let's just get some sleep, Ben said, his voice cracking slightly. We're just freaking ourselves out. Tomorrow we'll hike and get out of here. No more weirdness. But the night was far from over. The following morning arrived with an unsettling stillness. The fog that had rolled in during the night hung heavily in the air, shrouding the forest in an eerie mist. It was as if the trees themselves had swallowed the daylight, casting long shadows over the campsite. Ben was the first to wake. He rubbed his eyes, trying to shake the remnants of a restless sleep. The fire from last night had burned out, leaving only smoldering embers. His breath came out in visible puffs in the chill of the morning. Rise and shine, he called out, hoping to get the group moving. One by one, the others groggily emerged from their tents, their faces pale and drawn. None of them spoke of the events of the previous night, but there was a tension in the air, a palpable unease that hung between them like a thick fog. Even the birds were quiet, their usual songs replaced by an uncomfortable silence that stretched across the forest floor. We should head out, Lucas suggested, breaking the silence. We'll do a short hike today, maybe find a nice spot to have lunch. I'm not sure I want to go deeper into the forest, Emma admitted, her voice low. Something feels off. We can't let one strange night ruin the trip, Ben insisted, though his own words felt hollow. He couldn't deny that something in the forest felt wrong. He had lived in the woods for years, and he had never encountered anything like this. After some reluctant agreement, the group set off, following a narrow trail that wound through the ancient trees. The mist clung to their clothes, soaking their shoes with dew, and the quiet was oppressive, like the forest was holding its breath. As they walked, the trees grew more towering, their trunks growing wider and more gnarled. The forest seemed to close in on them, as if the trees were whispering to one another, plotting something unseen. The deeper they went, the more disorienting the forest became. The trail twisted and turned, as though the path itself was alive, reshaping itself with every step they took. It wasn't long before they realized they were lost. This doesn't look like the way we came, Julia said, her voice sharp with worry. She consulted her map, but the trail they were following had seemingly disappeared. There were no signs, no landmarks, just an endless sea of trees and fog. "This is impossible," Ryan muttered, turning around in circles. "We came from that way." "No," Ben said, his voice taut with frustration. "We've been walking in circles. This isn't just a forest, it's something else." "What do you mean?" Lucas asked, his brow furrowed. Ben's eyes darted around, his unease growing with each passing second. "It's like the forest. It knows we're here." Suddenly, the ground beneath their feet seemed to tremble. The trees around them groaned, their branches creaking as though they were alive, stretching toward them. The fog thickened, choking out the sunlight, and a deep guttural sound echoed from somewhere deep within the forest. The group froze, their eyes wide with terror. The sound was unmistakable, a low growl, like something far too large and ancient to be human, something that had awoken after centuries of silence. "What the hell is that?" Lucas whispered, his voice tight with fear. But Ben's gaze was fixed ahead, his eyes wide. He had seen it. Emerging from the fog, barely visible at first, was something massive, a shape too large to be a person, too distorted to be a bear. It moved with a terrifying grace, its form shifting and pulsating, like a creature made of shadows and fog. Its eyes gleamed from the darkness, two glowing orbs that seemed to pierce through the mist. The growl rumbled again, louder this time, and the ground trembled beneath them. "We need to get out of here," Ben said, his voice barely audible. He turned to run, but the forest seemed to close in around them, the trees now pressing in like a wall. No matter how hard they ran, the maze of shadows twisted and turned, trapping them in its grip. The creature, if it could be called that, was not alone. As the group fled deeper into the heart of the redwood forest, they realized the truth. They were no longer just lost. They were being hunted, and the forest itself had become their trap. The fog thickened, swirling around them like a living thing. The trees, ancient and gnarled, seemed to bend inward, their branches creaking and groaning under some unseen weight. The growls echoed from the depths of the forest, getting louder with each passing second, as if the very earth itself was alive and angry. Ben's breath came in short, panicked bursts as he looked around, trying to make sense of their surroundings. But the forest had become an unrecognizable maze, the paths twisting in unnatural ways, leading them deeper into the heart of darkness. The sky above them had turned a sickly shade of gray, and the air felt thick, almost oppressive. There was no sun, only a smothering twilight that seemed to have no end. "We need to find shelter," Ben shouted, his voice shaky. "There has to be a way out of this." But Emma could see the fear in his eyes. He was just as lost and terrified as they were. "I don't think we're getting out," Julia said, her voice trembling. She clutched her camera tightly, her knuckles white. "This place, it's not like any forest I've ever seen. It's alive." The growl came again, louder this time, reverberating through the trees, and Emma could have sworn she felt the ground shudder beneath her feet. A distant cry echoed, high-pitched and frantic. It sounded like a human scream, but distorted, twisted by pain and despair. "Did you hear that?" Ryan asked, his eyes wide, his voice hoarse with fear. They all heard it. "There's something else here," Ben muttered, his face pale. "Something that doesn't belong." Before anyone could respond, a figure emerged from the mist. Tall, skeletal, and draped in tattered ancient robes. Its face was obscured by a hood, but its eyes gleamed like burning coals. The creature moved with unnatural grace. It had led them here, back to the beginning, to where the curse had started. The creature from before appeared in front of them, blocking their path. "There is no escape," it said, its voice like the rustle of dry leaves. "You cannot outrun the forest. You cannot escape its hunger." Emma's heart sank as she looked around. The trees, the creatures, the spirits, they were all closing in. There was nowhere left to run. And then, in a moment of quiet desperation, Julia stepped forward. "I'll do it," she said softly. "I'll stay." The others turned to her in disbelief. "No!" Ben shouted. "You can't." "I have to," Julia said, her voice steady. "The forest will take me, but maybe it will let you go." Before anyone could stop her, she turned and walked toward the massive roots that had risen from the ground. The forest seemed to welcome her, the trees shifting to make room, their branches curling around her like cold, skeletal arms. "No!" Ben screamed, but it was too late. Julia turned to them one last time, her eyes full of sorrow. "Remember me," she whispered, and with that, the forest took her. The creatures, the spirits, they all surged forward, but Emma and Ben were already running. They didn't look back. But as they left the forest behind, they realized something. Julia hadn't just been a sacrifice. She had given her life to the forest, but the curse wasn't over. It had only just begun. The forest's grip tightened around them, its breath cold and suffocating, as Ben and Emma staggered forward, barely able to see through the fog. The air had turned damp and heavy, pressing against their chests, making each breath a struggle. Every footstep seemed to echo into infinity, lost in the vast living wilderness that surrounded them. They didn't speak as they ran. Words felt useless. What could they say? They had seen Julia sacrificed to the forest, her body absorbed into the ancient roots, consumed by the very thing they had disturbed. The hunger of the redwood forest was insatiable, and they were nothing but prey. Ben's mind raced. Julia. He could still see her face in his mind, the expression of resignation, the last words she had whispered, "Remember me." Those words lingered like a curse of their own, a haunting promise that no matter how far they ran, no matter how hard they tried, the forest would never let them go. The trees around them seemed to press in closer, their gnarled branches intertwining, blocking every path forward. It was like they were moving in circles, always returning to the same spot, a twisted reflection of their attempts to escape. The forest was toying with them, its power far beyond anything they had ever imagined. "Ben," Emma's voice broke through his thoughts, thin and trembling. "Do you hear that?" Ben stopped dead in his tracks, his body tense. He strained his ears. The whispers, the same eerie voices from the night before, had returned. Louder this time. Their words were garbled, disjointed, but there was a pattern, one that felt deliberate, sinister. The trees groaned, their branches reaching toward them, as if the forest itself was listening. "Leave," the whispers beckoned. "Sacrifice yourself." "No, no," Ben muttered, his voice rising in panic. We can't give in to this." Emma grabbed his arm, her grip tight. "Ben, we have to." Her words were cut off by a sudden scream, a distant cry filled with anguish, a sound so full of torment that it made Ben's blood run cold. For a fleeting moment, he thought it was Ryan, but when the cry faded, the forest became eerily quiet again. The fog thickened, and something worse, something far more dangerous, began to creep into the space between their breaths. The feeling of being watched, watched by eyes that were never seen, was overwhelming. "We can't outrun it," Ben said softly, the hopelessness creeping into his voice. "The forest is alive, Emma. We can't escape." Emma's face was pale, her eyes wide with fear. "But we have to try." Before Ben could respond, the ground beneath their feet trembled once more. He glanced down, his breath catching in his throat. The roots, they were moving. Writhing like serpents, they erupted from the soil, twisting and crawling toward them. "No!" Ben shouted, pulling Emma back as the roots closed in on them. "Run! We have to get out now!" They sprinted, dodging the encroaching roots, but the forest seemed to shift with every step they took. The path before them twisted, bending and splitting into multiple directions. The redwood trees towered above them, their trunks too wide to wrap their arms around, but each one seemed to pulse with a malevolent energy, as if they were part of something much older, much darker than anything they had ever known. Emma's breath was ragged, and she stumbled once, nearly falling to the ground. Ben caught her, pulling her upright, but they were both beginning to slow. The fatigue was weighing them down, and the realization that they were trapped was sinking in deeper. "Ben," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I can't keep running." He shook his head. "We can't stop now. We can't stop, or it will take us." But deep inside, he knew it was too late. The forest had already claimed them. It was only a matter of time before it would drag them into its depths, into the roots of its hunger. Suddenly the ground trembled again, this time more violently. Ben and Emma staggered, falling to their knees as the earth cracked open around them. A massive root shot up from the ground, wrapping around Ben's leg with terrifying force. "Ben!" Emma screamed, but the root pulled him away from her, lifting him off the ground as though he were nothing more than a leaf caught in a gust of wind. "No!" he shouted, reaching for Emma, but the root yanked him higher. His vision blurred with fear, and for a moment he thought of Julia, of how she had been taken, how she had sacrificed herself to give them a chance. But now, in this moment, it was clear. There was no escape. The forest was never going to let them go. "Ben, no!" Emma cried, her voice breaking as she watched him struggle, his hands desperately trying to pry the root from his leg. But the forest was too strong. It was too late. A horrific screech echoed through the forest, something ancient, something primal. And then, just as Ben felt his strength give out, the ground split open and everything went black. When Ben opened his eyes, he wasn't sure if he was alive or dead. His body felt heavy, like it was sinking into the earth itself. The air around him was thick with decay, the smell of wet wood and rotting leaves overwhelming his senses. "Emma," he whispered hoarsely, but his voice barely carried through the thick fog. His throat was dry, his limbs sluggish, and as he tried to push himself up, he realized the ground beneath him was no longer solid earth. It was soft, like rotting wood. Slowly, he looked around, his heart pounding as he recognized where he was. The forest. But something was wrong. The trees were no longer towering and ancient. They were twisted, grotesque, their bark thick and fleshy, like the skin of some terrible creature. The roots beneath him pulsed, moving, alive, and the whispers were louder now, a chorus of voices all overlapping, all calling out to him. "Leave this place. Feed the hunger. Join us." Ben staggered to his feet, panic clawing at his chest as he searched for Emma, but there was no sign of her, no sign of the others. Had they? A sickening realization gripped him, and his heart sank. He knew what had happened. He had been pulled into the forest's depths. The redwood forest had claimed him, just as it had claimed Julia, just as it had claimed so many before him. But something worse awaited him. Before he could move, he heard a sound behind him, a low guttural growl that reverberated through the trees. He turned, and there, standing before him, was the creature. The one from the clearing, the one that had spoken to them. But now it wasn't just a creature. It was the forest. It loomed over him, its eyes glowing with ancient malice. Its form shifted, writhing like the roots themselves, its limbs stretching out of the earth like jagged branches. "You have been claimed," the creature intoned, its voice a rasping whisper that seemed to echo from everywhere at once. Ben's heart froze in his chest. "No, I can't be." The creature tilted its head, its glowing eyes narrowing. "There is no escape. You are part of the forest now, as is she." It gestured toward a silhouette emerging from the mist. Ben's heart nearly stopped. It was Emma, but she wasn't herself anymore. Her skin was pale and clammy, her eyes hollow, like someone who had seen too much, someone who had died and been brought back, reborn in the forest's image. "Ben," Emma whispered, her voice like a distant echo. "We are the forest now. We are part of it." And as Ben reached out toward her, the last thing he saw before the world was swallowed by darkness was her face, twisted by an eternal hunger. Ben felt his legs buckle beneath him, and before he could comprehend what was happening, he was on the ground. His body felt heavy, like the earth itself was pulling him down into its depths. The air was thick with a damp, oppressive heaviness, and his vision blurred as though his very soul were being drained from him. "Emma," he gasped, his voice barely a whisper. She was standing just a few feet away from him, but she wasn't the same. Her skin was ashen, her eyes hollow, and her mouth was stretched into a grotesque grin. There was something wrong with her, something unnatural. The spirit of the forest had taken her, twisted her into one of its own. She wasn't human anymore. "Ben," she whispered again, her voice cold and distant. "We are part of it now. Don't you see? We are the forest." His chest tightened with an overwhelming sense of dread as he forced himself to his knees. But it felt like the ground was pushing back, trying to keep him down. The roots twisted around him, coiling tighter with every movement. "No," Ben breathed, his heart racing. "No, this can't be happening. This isn't real." But as he looked around, the truth became undeniable. The forest was no longer just a backdrop. It had become the world, his world. The trees loomed over him like giants, their bark alive with writhing tendrils. The air smelled of decay and ancient rot, and all around him the spirits of the lost were watching. They had always been there, hadn't they? The whispers, the cries, the endless eyes peering out from the shadows. They were not just sounds and sights. They were souls, trapped here, bound to the earth, consumed by the hunger of the forest. "We're dead, aren't we?" Ben whispered hoarsely, his voice shaking. Emma stepped closer, her once beautiful face now contorted into something alien. But there was a flicker of recognition in her eyes, a glimmer of who she used to be, a tiny thread of the person he had loved. "It's too late," she said softly. "The forest is hungry. It has taken us, Ben. All of us. We're nothing but part of it now." Ben's heart pounded in his chest, as he realized the horrifying truth. There was no escape. The redwood forest didn't just claim bodies, it claimed souls, twisting them into creatures of its own, bound to the earth forever, trapped in an endless cycle of torment and consumption, and it would never let them go. The roots around Ben began to move again, and the air thickened, as though the very atmosphere was closing in on him. His body felt cold, as if he were being drained of warmth, of life. His limbs were stiff, his fingers clawing at the earth as the darkness pressed in from all sides. "Emma, please," he cried out. "I don't want to be like this. I don't want to stay here." But Emma only shook her head, her lips curling into a twisted smile. "You don't have a choice, Ben. We are the forest now. We always have been." The ground beneath him shifted, and Ben screamed as the roots began to lift him into the air. He could feel his flesh being pulled apart, his body breaking down, turning to dust. But it wasn't just his body. His very soul was being consumed, ripped away from him by the forest's insatiable hunger. From deep within the heart of the redwood forest, the ancient creature, the one they had seen before, emerged from the darkness. Its eyes glowed with a terrible hunger, and as it stepped into the clearing, the forest seemed to tremble in reverence. "It is done," the creature said, its voice like the rustle of dry leaves in the wind. "You are now one with the forest. The cycle continues. The hunger will never end." Ben's scream echoed through the trees, but it was quickly swallowed by the endless expanse of darkness. There would be no rescue, no salvation, just endless suffering in the heart of the redwood forest. Years passed, or perhaps it was centuries. Time lost all meaning in the redwood forest, a place where nothing ever truly moved forward. The forest itself was alive, but its inhabitants, those who had been taken, were not. They were trapped, existing in a state of limbo, neither alive nor dead. Their bodies rotted, their souls twisted into something unrecognizable. The forest fed on them, and it fed on their suffering. The whispers continued. They were louder now, and they came from everywhere. The spirits of the lost, the ones who had trespassed before, the ones who had died before Ben, Emma, Julia, and the others, were now part of the forest, feeding its hunger. And yet, the cycle continued. Each year, a new group of unsuspecting souls wandered into the forest. Each year, the redwood forest claimed them, consuming their bodies, their souls, their very essence, until there was nothing left but the hunger. The trees, their bark now slick with the essence of the souls they had devoured, grew taller. Their roots spread deeper, their branches reached higher, and the forest expanded, slowly swallowing the world around it. No one knew how big it had become. No one knew how far its influence spread. But in the deepest part of the forest, beneath the ancient trees, the spirits of the lost whispered to one another. They were trapped, but they weren't alone, not anymore. And somewhere, deep within the shadows, Ben's voice echoed in the wind. "We are the forest now. We are the hunger." The redwood forest had claimed its victims, one by one. The stories of the haunted forest faded into local legends, warnings spoken in hushed tones, until the next group of adventurers arrived, blissfully unaware of the curse that awaited them. In the end, the redwood forest didn't just consume the souls of those who entered it. It became them, twisting their memories, their bodies, their very essence, into part of its endless cycle of terror. And so, the cycle would repeat, over and over until there were no more to claim, The redwood forest was eternal, and its hunger unquenchable. The mist rolled in over the hills, blanketing the city of San Francisco in an eerie, almost suffocating shroud. Alex Carter adjusted his rear-view mirror, looking at his wife, Nora, sitting beside him in the passenger seat. Her tired eyes met his, and for a moment, the shared silence between them was a mixture of exhaustion and hope. They'd spent weeks searching for a way to start over, away from the constant reminders of their failures. Their two children, Ben and Lucy, were asleep in the back of the old family SUV, their faces relaxed in the quiet lull of the journey. The noise of the city's streets had long faded, replaced by the soft hum of the tires on the highway as they approached their destination, an old mansion on the outskirts of town. Nora broke the silence, her voice soft but filled with anticipation. "Do you think this is really it? Our chance to start fresh?" Alex's lips twisted into a thin smile, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. "It has to be. We don't have a choice, Nora." The house stood tall against the fog, looming like something out of a forgotten time. The Victorian architecture, with its spires and arched windows, looked as though it had been untouched for centuries. The driveway stretched out in front of them, a long winding path lined with overgrown hedges that seemed to swallow the light from the setting sun. Despite the house's dilapidated appearance, Alex felt a strange sense of peace settle over him. This could be their sanctuary. As they pulled into the driveway, the weight of the moment hung in the air. Alex and Nora stepped out of the car, feeling the chill of the evening air bite at their skin. The front door creaked open with a ghostly groan as they stepped inside. Dust covered every surface, and the air smelled of age and abandonment. But there was something beautiful about it, the history embedded in the walls. "This is it," Alex muttered, though it didn't feel like the victory they had expected. There was a peculiar heaviness in the air, almost as if the house was watching them, waiting for something to unfold. The first night in the mansion was unsettling, but Alex and Nora tried to reassure each other. The creaks and groans of the old house were to be expected. They had moved in without much thought, drawn by the price and the idea of a fresh start. But now, in the silence of the night, everything felt different. Lucy was the first to hear it. She awoke in the middle of the night, her small frame sitting up in the bed, wide-eyed and still. "Mom, Dad, do you hear that?" Alex and Nora stirred from their sleep, looking toward their daughter. "Hear what, sweetheart?" Nora asked softly, trying to keep her voice calm. "The voices. They're calling me," Lucy whispered, her eyes glassy and distant. Nora sat up quickly, her heart racing. "It's just the house, Lucy. Go back to sleep." But Lucy shook her head, her small hands clutching the sheets. "No, Mama, they're calling me. They want me to follow them." Alex glanced nervously at Nora before moving to Lucy's side. He checked her forehead, expecting her to be feverish, but she was cold to the touch. "They're just the old pipes, honey," Alex said, trying to sound reassuring. "It's nothing." But as he returned to his bed, the whispers began again. This time Alex heard them too, faint at first, barely a murmur beneath the wind's howling, but unmistakable. His name, Alex. The voice was soft, almost soothing, but there was something undeniably wrong about it. Something ancient. The whispers continued throughout the night. At first it was just a strange hum, a low murmur that seemed to drift through the walls and around them. But by the second night, They were no longer subtle. The voices grew louder, clearer, as if something was trying to make contact with them. By the third night, the whispers had become an incessant, maddening noise, echoing in every corner of the house. Nora had become agitated, unable to sleep as she twisted and turned in the bed, her eyes wide in terror. She was convinced they weren't just hearing things, they were being watched. "I can't do this," she whispered one night, her voice strained with fear. "It's not just the house, it's something in the walls. Something wants us here." Alex tried to soothe her, but he felt it too. The house seemed to pulse with a dark energy, its very walls alive with an unseen force. The longer they stayed, the more the house seemed to consume them. Ben, their teenage son, became distant, spending hours alone in the attic where the whispers were the loudest. The more they tried to ignore it, the stronger the pull became. The house was beginning to draw them in, and no one was immune. One evening, desperate to understand what was happening to them, Alex went into town to speak with the local historian, an elderly man named James Westbrook, who had lived in the area for decades. James's eyes grew dark as Alex mentioned the mansion. "That house," he said, his voice low and hesitant, "was built over something far darker than anyone cares to remember. It's not just a house, it's a tomb, and not just for the family that lived there." Alex leaned forward, eager for any information that might explain the madness that was slowly consuming his family. "The mansion was built on the grounds of a forgotten cult," James continued. "The Whispering Order. They were obsessed with immortality, with dark rituals. They believed that by sacrificing souls they could summon something powerful, something beyond this world. They were successful in a way, but the price was their own lives." James paused, his face pale. "They didn't just die. They were consumed by what they had called. The mansion was their prison. Their souls are trapped within the walls, waiting for the next family to come along, waiting for a new sacrifice." Alex felt a chill crawl up his spine. Could this really be true? Was the mansion built over a place of such evil? And were the whispers coming from the spirits of the cult, waiting to finish their twisted ritual? The days began to blur together, each one darker and more oppressive than the last. The house was no longer simply old or decaying. It had become a living, breathing entity. Every creak of the floorboards, every sigh of the wind through the cracked windows felt intentional, as though the mansion itself was watching them. Nora, once a woman of strength, now seemed fragile. Her eyes were haunted, and she spent more time locked away in the rooms, murmuring to herself as though trying to block out the whispers that swirled around her. Alex could see the change in her, and it terrified him. She wasn't the woman he had married. She was becoming someone else, something else. I can't stand it anymore," Nora whispered one evening, her voice shaking. Her fingers twitched, reaching for something unseen in the air, as though she was trying to pull away from the invisible force that seemed to surround them. "It's inside me. It's inside all of us." Alex tried to comfort her, but her hands trembled, and her eyes darted around as if she could see something he couldn't. "I know you're scared," he said gently, "but we can't give up now. We need to find a way out together." But the whispers were louder that night, more insistent. They weren't just voices anymore. The walls themselves seemed to pulse, vibrating with energy as if alive, the very foundation of the house shifting beneath their feet. Alex could feel it too now, the pull of something terrible, an oppressive weight that filled the air and made every breath feel heavier. The family gathered in the living room that night, the shadows creeping over the walls, each of them unable to escape the sensation of being watched. The house was alive, and it wanted them. The attic had become Ben's sanctuary, his retreat from the madness that was slowly consuming the rest of the family. The whispers seemed to call him more than anyone else, promising him answers, offering him knowledge, pulling him deeper into the heart of the house's dark power. Alex and Nora tried to intervene, but each time they found him, he was more distant, his eyes glazed over, and his behavior increasingly erratic. One evening, Alex climbed up to the attic to find his son, the floor creaking under his weight with each step. The attic was cluttered with forgotten relics of the past, old furniture draped in sheets, piles of dusty books, and boxes that seemed to have been untouched for decades. The whispers were louder here, almost deafening. "Ben!" Alex called out, his voice strained with fear and frustration. From the corner of the room, Ben turned slowly, his eyes wide but unseeing. He was standing in front of a large, ancient-looking mirror, its surface cracked but still intact. His face was pale, and his lips moved slowly, as though reciting something under his breath. "They've shown me," Ben whispered, his voice low and distant. "The way, the path to eternal life. I just need to finish it." Alex's heart skipped a beat. "What are you talking about, Ben? Come back to us. Whatever is happening, we can stop it. Together." But Ben only shook his head, his expression vacant. "The house is calling me, Dad. I have to answer." Alex's mind raced as he stepped forward, trying to reach his son. The mirror in front of Ben seemed to shimmer with an unnatural light. The whispers grew louder still, an unbearable cacophony. Suddenly Ben raised his hand, his fingers twitching in a way that seemed unnatural. "It's too late, Dad. We're already part of it now. It wants us. All of us." Before Alex could respond, Ben turned abruptly, disappearing into the shadows of the attic. Alex's heart pounded in his chest, and he rushed after his son. But when he reached the spot where Ben had stood, there was no sign of him. Only the mirror, reflecting nothing but darkness. The next morning, the house seemed even darker. The once comforting sun that had filtered through the windows now felt distant, cold. Alex had finally found Ben, standing outside the house near the overgrown garden, staring out at nothing. His son's eyes were empty, no longer filled with confusion, but with something darker. "Ben," Alex whispered, kneeling in front of him. "What happened to you? What did you see?" Ben's gaze flickered, and for a moment there was a hint of recognition in his eyes. "I saw them, Dad. The people who built this house. They're not dead. They're waiting for us. For me." Alex's blood ran cold. The house had been built on the ruins of an ancient cult, the Whispering Order. But now, Alex realized the full extent of the horror. The spirits of the cult's members were not trapped in some otherworldly plane. They were bound to the house itself, each whisper, each cold breath coming from the walls, an attempt to draw in new victims. The ritual that had gone wrong all those years ago was never finished, and now the house itself was a gateway, waiting for the final step to be completed. Alex felt the weight of it all, the cursed history, the lives lost, the eternal hunger of the house. He had no idea what was waiting for them in the deep hidden chambers of the mansion, but he knew one thing for sure. They couldn't leave. The cult had never left. They were still here. As the days passed, the family's grip on reality began to slip. The house had become their prison, its walls closing in tighter with each passing moment. The whispers were no longer just words. They were thoughts, invasive and unrelenting, speaking to them in ways they couldn't ignore. Each family member had their own version of the whispers, each tailored to their fears and desires. Nora, more fragile than ever, began to speak to the walls as though they were her only friends. She would sit for hours in the dim light, muttering words that didn't make sense, caught in the trance of the spirits that surrounded them. It wasn't long before Alex realized that she wasn't just hearing the whispers, she was becoming them. Lucy, the youngest, had started drawing strange symbols on the walls of her room, her small hands moving with a purpose that terrified Alex. The drawings were intricate and old, symbols that didn't belong in the modern world. She would look at them, then whisper, "They're waiting for me." And Alex knew, deep down, that she wasn't speaking of the children she had once played with. Ben, too, seemed lost, his obsession with the house growing stronger. He spent hours in the attic, and when Alex went up to see him, he found Ben kneeling before the cracked mirror, muttering incomprehensible phrases. "It's almost time, Dad. The ritual's almost complete." Alex felt a chill down his spine. The ritual. The pieces were falling into place. He could see now what had to be done. The last twisted step in the cult's endless cycle of death and rebirth. The mansion was no longer just a house. It was alive with malevolent energy. The walls vibrated with anticipation, the air thick with an unnatural stillness. As Alex stepped into the hidden chamber beneath the house, the final revelation hit him like a wave of terror. The cult's leader, Elias Creed, was not dead. He had never truly left. Alex found himself face to face with the ghostly figure of Elias, who stood in front of an altar bathed in eerie light. "You've come," Elias whispered, his voice low and powerful, a chilling echo that reverberated through the chamber. "You're just in time." "Just in time for what?" Alex demanded, his voice cracking with fear and anger. "For the ritual, of course," Elias said, his cold eyes gleaming. "The house needs new blood, Alex. Your family will complete what we started all those years ago. The door will open, and the darkness will return, and we will finally be free." In that moment, Alex realized the horrifying truth. The house was not just a prison for the spirits. It was the very key to a new world, one that would be ruled by the cult and the entity they had summoned. His family had been brought here to feed the ritual, to open the door to an unimaginable horror. With a sudden burst of courage, Alex lunged at Elias, knocking him away from the altar. He grabbed the journal, the final piece of the puzzle, and burned it with the fire from the candles surrounding the room. The house screamed, the walls cracked and shattered, the spirits of the cult writhing in agony. The air turned cold, freezing Alex to the bone as the very foundation of the mansion trembled. With a final desperate cry, the house collapsed, and the cult's influence was broken, their souls forever trapped in the debris. Only Alex and Ben escaped the ruins of the mansion, but they were forever scarred. As they walked away from the crumbling structure, Alex looked back one last time, but The mansion had already begun to fade into the fog, as if it had never existed at all. It was Elias Creed, the leader of the cult, standing in front of him as though he had never died. "You should have never left," Elias said, his voice a rasping whisper that seemed to echo in Alex's mind. "You cannot escape what you are a part of, Alex. You and your family have always been meant for this. The door is open, and the world is waiting." Alex's blood ran cold. The door between worlds, was open, and the entity they had once summoned was beginning to stir. The ritual had not been finished in the mansion, but it was now complete. Ben, his eyes locked onto the figure of Elias, took a step forward. "I'm ready," he said, his voice devoid of any emotion. "I'm ready to join them." Alex rushed forward, panic rising in his chest. "Ben, no!" he screamed, grabbing his son by the shoulders. "You have to fight it! You're not alone!" But Ben's eyes flickered, and for a brief moment, Alex saw the boy he had raised. Ben's mouth trembled as he whispered, I can't stop it, Dad." Elias stepped closer, his hands raised in a gesture of finality. "It's too late for him, Alex. It's too late for all of you." As Alex struggled to hold on to his son, a terrible guttural growl reverberated through the walls of the cabin. The ground shook again, more violently now, and the air became thick with the smell of decay and rot. The entity, the one that the cult had worshipped, was awakening. Suddenly, the entire world seemed to shift. The walls of the cabin began to bleed darkness, and the very fabric of reality seemed to tear apart. Alex screamed as he watched the shadows come alive, swirling around his son, pulling him away from his grasp. In one final desperate act, Alex pulled the jagged piece of stone from Ben's hand and threw it into the heart of the darkness. There was a blinding flash of light, and the shadows screamed in agony. For a moment, everything stopped. Then, as quickly as it had begun, the madness ceased. The cabin was silent. The ground no longer shook. The air was still. Alex's heart pounded in his chest as he looked around. The shadows had vanished, but Ben was gone. The entity had taken him, and Elias Creed, too, had disappeared into the void. Days turned into weeks, and Alex found himself standing at the edge of the mountain, staring out at the horizon. His son was gone, the cult was gone, but the terror, the whispers, still lingered, soft and insistent in the back of his mind. He would never be free. The mansion had burned, but the legacy of the Whispering Order would never be extinguished. It had been passed on to him, to Ben, and now it would follow him forever. The entity was still out there, waiting for the next family to stumble into the trap. And Alex knew, deep in his soul, that the mansion had only been the beginning. The house was still waiting. The walls were still whispering, always hungry, always waiting. Weeks had passed since Ben had disappeared, and Alex's world had been reduced to a cold, aching emptiness. The silence that followed the chaos of the cabin felt unnatural. Every corner of the small mountain retreat, once a haven, now felt like a tomb. The walls seemed to press inward, the air heavy, suffocating, and the whispers, they never stopped. Alex had tried to block it all out, retreating further into isolation. He cut off contact with the outside world, abandoned his phone, and refused to answer letters or messages from concerned friends and relatives. They didn't understand. No one did. One night, as he sat alone in the cabin's darkened living room, his mind a maze of fractured thoughts, A strange sensation overcame him, a deep, unsettling feeling that something was watching him. The feeling crawled up his spine, and despite the quiet, the walls began to hum, soft at first, but slowly growing louder. The whispers were back, more persistent than ever, but this time, they weren't coming from the walls. They were coming from inside his own head. You can't escape. You never could. Alex's breath caught in his throat. He slammed his palms over his ears, trying to block out the voice. His pulse hammered in his temples, and for a moment he was sure he could feel something moving behind his eyes, something dark and malicious stirring inside him. The whisper was unmistakable. Ben's voice. But Ben was gone. Ben had been taken. It's not over, Dad. The whisper grew louder, more desperate, and Alex's hands trembled as he clutched his head. The house is still calling you. You're still part of it. He staggered back, gasping for breath. His legs felt weak beneath him, and his vision blurred. The room around him seemed to melt, the shadows lengthening into shapes he couldn't quite make out. The house was calling him. The entity was coming for him. Alex stumbled to his feet and rushed to the door, gasping for air as he opened it. But the forest outside was dark and still. It was quiet. Too quiet. Then he saw it. Through the trees, faint but unmistakable, was the outline of the mansion. The very mansion that had once been buried under the rubble of the cult's twisted rituals. It stood as if nothing had happened, an ancient structure bathed in a ghostly light. The walls seemed to shimmer in the darkness, as if inviting him back. Alex felt a cold sweat break out across his skin, his heart hammering in his chest. He had destroyed the mansion. He had burned it to the ground. It was gone, or so he thought, but the mansion was alive, and it was waiting for him. The pull was undeniable. Despite every instinct in his body screaming for him to run, Alex felt himself walking toward the mansion, his steps heavy and reluctant, yet somehow drawn forward. The whispers called to him, their voices growing louder as he drew nearer. They twisted around him, drowning out his thoughts until all that remained was the sound of the walls, the sound of them. He reached the mansion's threshold, and the door, once destroyed, now stood open before him. The threshold had become a gateway. The air around him was thick with an otherworldly chill, and as he stepped over the threshold, the familiar suffocating pressure settled in. The house had never truly left. He stepped inside, the wooden floorboards creaking beneath him. The walls groaned in unison, as if welcoming him back. "Welcome home, Alex," a voice hissed, low and mocking, inside his mind. He looked around, but the house seemed empty. Nothing was there. Then from the shadows, Elias Creed appeared, his gaunt form emerging from the darkness like a specter. His eyes gleamed with a malevolent hunger, his smile cold and twisted. "Did you think you could escape?" Elias whispered, stepping closer, his voice like a soft caress of poison in Alex's ear. "You are as much a part of the house as we are, Alex. You can never leave." Alex's knees buckled beneath him, and he collapsed to the ground, the weight of the realization crashing over him. The mansion, the cult, the ritual, it was all tied to him now. He had completed it. He had opened the door, and the entity, the dark force that had been waiting, was now free. But it wasn't just one entity. The mansion had always been a doorway, a nexus between worlds, a place where the veil between the living and the dead thinned. And now, It had begun to bleed, allowing entities from other realms to step through. The walls began to pulse, the shadows coiling in the corners of the rooms like serpents. The house itself seemed to breathe, its air thick with suffocating malevolence. "The doorway is open," Elias hissed, "and you will be the first to join us, to serve us." Alex's mind screamed as the walls closed in, the air thickening with the power of the ritual that had been unleashed. The spirits of the cult, bound by blood and darkness, began to appear, faces distorted by agony, their hollow eyes staring at him, as though they could see into the very marrow of his soul. The mansion wanted him. The house was alive, and its hunger could never be satisfied. The days that followed became a blur of terror and madness. Alex was no longer sure what was real. The house twisted and shifted, constantly changing, its walls pulsating with an unbearable intensity. Sometimes he saw Ben's face in the reflections of broken mirrors. Other times, he heard his son's voice, pleading, calling for help. But no matter how desperately Alex searched, Ben was never truly there. He was trapped in the same nightmare, just beyond reach. The mansion had no end, no escape. The walls seemed endless, stretching into impossible corridors. Every room Alex opened seemed to lead to another version of the house, darker and more corrupted than before. The very fabric of reality bent and twisted around him. He could no longer tell if he was walking through the halls of a mansion or if the mansion was walking through his mind. The ritual had been completed, but at a cost. The walls had fed on him, and now he was part of them. The whispers grew louder, more insistent. Every room was filled with a chorus of voices that pushed him to the edge of insanity. They no longer spoke in riddles. They demanded things. They commanded him. In a final desperate act, Alex decided to find the heart of the mansion, the place where it all began, the place where the entity had first been summoned, where the cult had sealed their pact with the darkness. As he ventured deeper into the mansion, the walls seemed to close in on him. The shadows were thick, crawling like liquid through the cracks. The air was heavy, filled with the smell of rot and decay. The walls whispered his name in voices that were no longer human. He found the altar, the place where the cult had made their final sacrifice. But this time, the altar wasn't empty. Elias Creed stood before it, surrounded by a swirling vortex of darkness. The ground trembled beneath Alex's feet as the walls began to buckle and collapse inward. The mansion was coming alive. It was consuming itself. "You can't stop it now," Elias said, his voice both a warning and a promise. "You are part of it, Alex. You always were." Alex felt his breath stop in his chest. He was no longer a man. He was a part of the house. The walls, the spirits, the ritual, they had all merged into him. His body was no longer his own, his mind no longer a refuge. The mansion had claimed him, and the world outside would never know of the horrors contained within. The final whispers, soft and insistent, echoed in his mind. The house waits, always hungry, always waiting, and thus the cycle continues. Alex, now part of the mansion, joins the endless legion of spirits trapped within its walls. The curse of the Whispering Order is never-ending, and the mansion continues to hunger for new souls. It waits, always hungry, always patient. In the months that followed Alex's disappearance, the world outside the mansion continued as if nothing had happened. The media reported little about the collapse of the house. The remains of the mansion had been hastily removed, leaving only a strange emptiness in its place, a void that seemed unnatural, as if something important had been taken from the city itself. Then one day, a new family arrived in San Francisco. The Quinn family, a young couple, Ryan and Lucy, both eager for a fresh start after moving from the East Coast, had no idea that their new home was anything but an ordinary historical mansion. Lucy had always dreamed of living in an old house, one with character, a place steeped in history. Ryan, ever the pragmatist, had been reluctant, but when they came across the mansion for sale, it seemed like fate. The price was surprisingly low, and the house, with its grand facade and intricate carvings, held a certain charm. It had been neglected for years, but with a little elbow grease, they could make it their own. What they didn't know was that the house had already claimed someone else's soul, and it was still hungry. The Quinns stood on the front porch of the mansion, surveying their new home with a sense of excitement and awe. The air was thick with the scent of old wood and dust, but the place held an undeniable allure. Ryan took a deep breath, stepping over the threshold first, eager to get inside and start unpacking. Lucy followed closely behind, her eyes scanning the dim interior. The floor creaked beneath their feet as they moved through the foyer, the light from their lantern casting eerie shadows on the walls. The rooms were grand, with high ceilings and large windows, but there was something unsettling about the place. The wallpaper peeled in places, revealing the dark weathered wood beneath. Cobwebs clung to the corners, and a musty odor filled the air. "This place is beautiful," Lucy said, her voice filled with wonder. "It's like stepping into another time." Ryan didn't respond immediately. His eyes lingered on the walls, noting how thick they were, how the shadows seemed to shift in the dim light. It felt as though the house was watching them. The feeling was fleeting but unsettling. He tried to shake it off. Old houses had character, didn't they? But as he turned to Lucy, something caught his eye, a flash of movement, something in the corner of the room, a shape that vanished the moment he looked at it. He blinked, confused, but dismissed it as his imagination. They moved through the rooms, opening doors and exploring, but the oppressive atmosphere of the house never let up. It followed them, lurking just out of sight. As they reached the second floor, a loud, shrill sound echoed through the halls. The sound seemed to come from the walls themselves, a distant, ghostly whisper, faint but unmistakable. Lucy's face went pale. "Did you hear that?" Ryan nodded slowly, unease creeping into his chest. He opened his mouth to say something, but the sound of the whisper came again, louder this time. The words were unintelligible, but they felt wrong. "Maybe it's just the wind," Ryan said, trying to sound more confident than he felt. "Let's just finish unpacking, okay? We'll get used to it." Over the following days, the Quinns tried to settle into their new life. They started fixing up the house, repainting walls, cleaning out the rooms. But the whispers grew louder with each passing night. It was as though the walls themselves were alive, murmuring in an ancient, forgotten language. Ryan tried to rationalize it. Old houses creaked and groaned with age, but Lucy wasn't so sure. She started to feel a strange weight in the air, a heaviness that seemed to press on her chest every time she entered certain rooms. One evening, after a long day of unpacking, Lucy sat in the living room with a book, trying to distract herself from the oppressive atmosphere. Ryan was in the kitchen, unpacking the last of the boxes. But then the whispering began again. This time, it was unmistakable. The voices from the walls were no longer just distant murmurs. They were calling her name. Lucy. Lucy, come closer. Her heart raced as she stood up, the book dropping to the floor. The temperature in the room seemed to drop, and the whispering grew louder. The walls around her began to hum, a deep resonant sound that vibrated through her bones. "Ryan!" she called out, but the words came out strangled, as if the very air around her was choking her. Ryan came rushing in, his eyes wide with concern. "What's going on?" Before she could answer, a loud bang echoed from the upstairs hallway. Both of them froze. The sound was followed by a long, low groan, the unmistakable sound of a door creaking open. Ryan swallowed hard, the color draining from his face. "Did you hear that?" They exchanged a glance, the unspoken terror hanging in the air between them. The house was awake, and it was hungry. That night, the Quinns were unable to sleep. They lay awake in the darkness of their bedroom, staring at the ceiling, listening to the quiet creaks and groans of the house. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows, but the sound of the whispers had returned, growing louder with each passing minute. Ryan turned to Lucy, his voice low and shaky. "Lucy, we need to get out of here." Lucy shook her head, her eyes wide with fear. "I can't. It's like the house won't let us leave. It wants us here." The whispering grew louder, more insistent. Suddenly, the door to their bedroom slammed open with a force that rattled the walls. Ryan jumped up, heart racing, but there was nothing there. No one. Only the dark shadows of the hallway, stretching unnaturally long. "I don't understand," Lucy whispered, her voice trembling. "Why is it doing this? What does it want from us?" Before Ryan could respond, there was a loud crack from behind the walls, followed by a series of high-pitched whispers. But these weren't just whispers. These were words, their words. The ritual must be completed. Ryan's blood ran cold. "That's it. We need to leave, now." But when they tried to flee, the doors wouldn't open. The windows were sealed shut. The house had trapped them. Desperate, Ryan and Lucy began to search the house for a way out. They knew they couldn't stay, but the house seemed to twist and change around them. Every hallway they ran down seemed to loop back into the same room. The house itself was playing with them, toying with their minds. That's when they discovered the hidden door. In the basement, buried beneath layers of dust and old furniture, was a trapdoor. Ryan had to force it open, and when he did, he revealed a narrow staircase leading down into the darkness. With no other option, they descended into the depths of the mansion. At the bottom of the stairs, they found an underground chamber. The air was thick with the stench of rot, and the walls were covered in strange symbols. In the center of the room, a large stone altar stood. Dark stains splattered across its surface. And there, surrounding the altar, were the remains of the original cult members. Their bodies were twisted, burned, and disfigured, but they weren't dead, not completely. Their eyes glowed with an unnatural light. The whispers echoed in their minds once more. "You shouldn't have come. You shouldn't have disturbed the ritual." Ryan and Lucy backed away in horror, but it was too late. The spirits of the cult rose from the ground, their eyes fixed on them. The mansion had claimed them. The ritual wasn't just an ancient practice, it was a never-ending cycle. And now, it was their turn. The Quins' fate is sealed as they become part of the mansion's dark history, just like those before them. The house, now fully awakened, seeks out new victims, new souls to possess and torment. The walls wait, the whispers return, the hunger never ends. And so the mansion stands, its doors always open for the next family, the next soul to take, always hungry, always waiting. It was one of those nights that felt wrong from the very beginning. Sarah sat behind the wheel of the old Chevy, her hands gripping the steering wheel as though she could will herself into staying awake. The headlights cut through the Texas darkness, illuminating nothing but long stretches of flat, featureless roads. James was beside her, silent, the usual buzz of their conversations long since silenced by the monotonous thrum of the engine. They had been driving for hours from one empty highway to another, desperately trying to shake off the oppressive silence. It wasn't that they didn't have anything to say. It was just that the atmosphere outside their car felt so suffocating. No other cars, no sign of life in the vast, empty expanse of the plains. "This place gives me the creeps," Sarah muttered, glancing over at James, whose brow furrowed as he stared at the road ahead. "I know," he replied, his voice flat. "It's like we're the only people left." She wasn't sure whether to laugh or keep driving. The thought of being isolated in the middle of nowhere, with nothing but the whispering winds and the occasional distant howl of an animal, wasn't exactly comforting. They hadn't seen another car for hours, and the air around them felt thick with something they couldn't name. It was too quiet, too still. Then, without warning, the silence was broken. A flicker of light in the distance. At first, Sarah thought it was just another mirage, some odd trick of the desert air, perhaps. But then the light grew larger, more defined. It was like 1,000 stars suddenly blinking to life on the horizon. "What the hell is that?" Sarah whispered under her breath, squinting her eyes to try and make sense of the glow ahead. She couldn't have been more than a mile away when she saw it, a towering structure emerging from the darkness. "It's a carnival," James said, his voice rising with disbelief. A carnival? Out here? In the middle of nowhere? By the time they had pulled off the road, the sight before them was like something out of a dream, or perhaps a nightmare. What had once been a vast, empty plain was now consumed by an entire carnival that had seemingly sprung up overnight. There was no other explanation. One moment, the night was devoid of life, and the next, a sprawling festival of lights, music, and color stood before them, as if it had materialized from thin air. It was unlike any carnival they had ever seen. Bright neon lights lit up the night sky, casting long shadows over the strange, exaggerated structures that loomed over them. Gigantic Ferris wheels and twisted roller coasters swirled in the distance, each turning unnaturally fast. The music that poured from the carnival seemed distorted. A carnival tune, yes, but warped, as if it had been played on an old broken record. "Let's check it out," James said, eyes wide with curiosity, though there was a note of hesitation in his voice. Sarah wasn't sure if it was the curiosity or the isolation that pushed them to get out of the car, but before long, they were standing at the iron gates, which were cracked and rusted with age. The iron arch overhead read, "The deadliest carnival of Texas." The moment they stepped inside, Sarah felt a strange unease wash over her. The air felt thick, heavy with something unspoken. There was a faint smell of popcorn, sweet sugar, and something else, something metallic, almost like blood. James, who had always been the more adventurous one, was grinning as he looked around. I mean, this place is definitely strange, but it's kind of cool, right? But Sarah could only nod half-heartedly, her mind already racing with questions. Why had they not seen any cars? Where had all these people come from? She could hear voices in the distance, but no one was visible. Everything felt too still, too staged, like a set waiting for its actors. Let's grab something to eat, James suggested. Maybe the food stands have something. They walked through the midway, the lights above them flickering and buzzing like old neon. The sounds of the carnival, the distorted brass band music, the hollow laughter of children, seemed to come from all directions at once. But still, they didn't see a single person. As they approached one of the food stalls, Sarah stopped, her stomach turning. There were no vendors, only food that sat under heat lamps, untouched and stale. The hot dogs, the cotton candy, even the pretzels, all of it was unnervingly perfect in appearance, too perfect. But they were cold, and there was no smell of fresh food. James didn't seem to notice. This is unreal, he muttered, eyes wide with excitement, though Sarah could hear the tremor in his voice. They continued down the midway, and Sarah felt the hair on the back of her neck rise. The whole carnival was off. It felt wrong. They wandered deeper into the carnival, passing by more attractions. A house of mirrors stood ahead, its edges cracked and weathered, as though it had been left here for years. The reflection inside was fragmented and disorienting, but they kept walking, drawn further in by some unseen force. Then they saw it, the first sign that something was seriously wrong. A clown. He stood near a small game booth, his face painted in garish colors. But unlike the jovial clown Sarah had seen at fairs, this one looked wrong. His smile was too wide, too sharp. His eyes, though hidden behind oversized round glasses, glinted with something unnatural. Come play. Win prizes, the clown called out in a voice that sounded almost too loud, too eager. Sarah and James exchanged uncomfortable glances. Let's skip this one, Sarah said quietly, pulling at his sleeve. But James was already walking toward the booth. Come on, Sarah. This is why we came, right? He called over his shoulder, grinning. A little fun before we head home. She didn't want to follow, but she couldn't explain why. Something about the clown, something about the entire carnival made her skin crawl. They approached the booth, and the clown handed them a small, intricately carved wooden token. Try your luck, the clown said, his voice barely above a whisper now, as if the entire atmosphere had become saturated with the promise of something dreadful. There were several twisted carnival games ahead. One involved throwing darts at balloons, but the balloons were a sickly, unnatural shade of green. Another featured a giant spinning wheel, its prizes labeled with cryptic symbols, each one more disturbing than the last. I'll go first, James said, stepping forward. He aimed a dart at one of the balloons, but as soon as the tip of the dart touched the surface, the balloon didn't pop. Instead, a grotesque, hideous face appeared in the balloon's reflection, eyes bulging, mouth opening in a silent scream. James staggered back, his breath shallow, his eyes wide with terror. James? Sarah said, her voice trembling. What the hell was that? Before he could answer, the clown's voice echoed, louder and more commanding now. The game has already begun. This was only the beginning. The couple would soon learn that the carnival was not a place for entertainment. It was a twisted purgatory, a dark force that feasted on the fears of those who entered. Each ride, each game, each attraction was part of a macabre ritual designed to trap the soul. They would face deadly clowns, deformed carnival workers, and unholy attractions, each one designed to break their minds and spirits. The music, the lights, the endless cycle, they would come to realize they were trapped in a nightmarish world that had no exit. They had entered the deadliest carnival of Texas, and now they would have to play for their lives. James stared at the dart he had thrown, the image of that distorted face lingering in his mind like a nightmare that refused to fade. He couldn't tear his eyes away from the balloon, the grotesque mouth still frozen in silent horror, as if it were mocking him. The clown, who had once seemed so jovial, now looked eerily still, watching with a strange intensity. His lips twisted into a grin, though it wasn't friendly, and his eyes seemed to glisten with a malice that sent a cold chill down Sarah's spine. She pulled at James's arm, but he didn't seem to hear her. His body stood rigid, as if paralyzed by the face in the balloon, and for a moment it was as though the entire world around them had slowed. "James?" Sarah asked again, this time more urgently. "Come on, let's get out of here." The clown's voice echoed through the silence. "You can't leave. The game has already begun." James blinked rapidly, shaking his head, as if trying to snap out of a trance. He looked at Sarah with wide eyes, his voice trembling. I don't know what happened. It's like I couldn't move, like something was holding me here." Before Sarah could say anything, the ground beneath their feet began to tremble. The carnival lights flickered and buzzed, casting strange shadows that danced around them like disembodied spirits. The sound of a carnival organ filled the air, eerie and distorted, as though the instrument itself was possessed. In the distance, something else began to stir. From the shadows of the carnival tents, figures began to emerge, slowly at first, like marionettes coming to life. Sarah's heart thudded in her chest as she saw the first of them, a clown, but not like the one at the booth. This one was massive, towering over the others with skin as white as bone and a smile that stretched impossibly wide. His eyes were black voids, and his hands, long and bony, dragged along the ground, scraping as he moved. "James, we need to go, now!" Sarah cried, panic rising in her voice. She turned, pulling him with her, but her feet felt glued to the ground. The carnival seemed to be alive, shifting and closing in around them. It had cages, and inside the cages were people, screaming, writhing, their eyes wide with terror as they pounded against the bars. The ringmaster gestured to the carnival's twisted rides. "Choose your game," he said. "Choose wisely, for the consequences are irreversible." Sarah and James exchanged a glance, their hearts pounding. They had no choice but to play. To survive, they had to face the horrors of the carnival. And every twisted ride, every demonic barker, every horrifying challenge was a test of their will to live. But even as they moved forward, they knew one truth. No one left the deadliest carnival of Texas, not alive, not sane, and certainly not free. The ringmaster's voice lingered in the air, filling their ears with its haunting resonance. His twisted smile burned into their minds as he led them to the next horrifying challenge, the maze. "Make it through the maze," he said with a cruel chuckle, "and you will face your fears, fail, and the show continues without you, forever." Sarah felt a cold shiver crawl down her spine. She could feel the sweat beginning to pool in her palms, her heart racing as the thick, musty air of the carnival seemed to close in around her. The carnival's lights flickered as the maze materialized before them, its walls formed from gnarled trees that twisted and spiraled unnaturally, as if the very earth itself had become diseased. "I hate this place," Sarah muttered, eyes scanning the edges of the maze. The trees towered above them like dark giants, their branches clawing at the air like skeletal fingers. The ground beneath them felt soft and unstable, as if they were walking on soil that might shift and swallow them whole. "Don't worry," James said, trying to reassure her with a strained smile. "We'll make it out." But his words felt hollow. There was no escaping this place. Not really. The carnival wasn't just a trap. It was alive. And the longer they stayed, the more they became part of it. It was in their bones now, this twisted nightmare. The feeling that something was always watching, always lurking, was overwhelming. Without any other choice, they stepped into the maze. As they moved deeper into the maze, the path behind them began to disappear, swallowed by a thick fog that rolled in like a living creature, creeping along the ground. Sarah's breathing quickened as she glanced over her shoulder, her senses straining for any sign of movement. The music had stopped. The silence felt unnatural, almost oppressive, like the calm before the storm. Suddenly a faint sound, a whisper, echoed through the fog. "Help me!" Sarah froze. The voice sounded familiar, but there was something off about it. Was it someone they knew? Someone trapped in the maze? "James," she whispered, her voice cracking. "Did you hear that?" He nodded, his face pale. "Yeah, it sounded like my sister, but it can't be." "Stay close," Sarah said, gripping his arm tighter. They pressed on, the fog swirling around them, blocking their view. The whispers grew louder. "James, help me. I'm so scared." James jerked his head toward the sound. "It's her. It's my sister, I swear." "No," Sarah said, grabbing his arm before he could run toward the voice. "It's a trick. It's not real." But James pulled away from her, desperation in his eyes. "I have to help her. She's been missing for years, and this might be my only chance to find her." Before Sarah could stop him, James took off into the fog, his footsteps quickly swallowed by the mist. Panic surged through Sarah's chest as she turned, her eyes desperately searching for him. "James!" she cried, but the maze had already consumed him. Sarah stood there, paralyzed by the uncertainty of whether she should chase after him or keep moving forward. The whispering voices echoed again, but now they were joined by other sounds, groans, soft cries of pain, and the rattling of chains. The fog was thick now, almost suffocating, and it was impossible to see more than a few feet in front of her. The maze itself seemed to twist, its pathways shifting as if the walls were alive, changing with every step she took. No matter which way she turned, the path would loop back on itself, the same twisted trees and gnarled roots reappearing in every direction. "James!" Sarah screamed again, but the only response was the eerie, muffled laughter of the ringmaster, his voice floating through the air as if coming from nowhere and everywhere at once. "Don't you see? The ringmaster's voice was like velvet, smooth and chilling. "This maze is no ordinary trap. It feeds on you, Sarah, on your fears. The more you try to escape, the deeper you fall into its grip." The fog thickened, and Sarah's vision began to blur. Her pulse raced as she stumbled, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She was losing track of time. How long had it been? An hour? A day? She had no idea. Everything felt wrong, twisted. The walls of the maze seemed to close in on her, the trees stretching out their limbs like claws, reaching for her. And then she heard it, James's scream. The sound was so distorted, so inhuman, that Sarah's stomach twisted with horror. It was followed by the unmistakable sound of something scraping against the ground, dragging along the earth like a broken puppet being forced to walk. "No!" she shouted, moving faster, her heart pounding. The fog shifted, revealing a clearing ahead. As she rushed toward it, the shadows seemed to open into a space too large, too impossible for a simple carnival maze. In the center of the clearing was a carnival ride, something Sarah couldn't quite identify. It was a giant spiraling contraption, like a carousel gone mad. But instead of horses, it was filled with skeletal figures, their eyes hollow and vacant. Each figure was mounted on a twisted mechanical animal, and they moved in a sickening, jerking motion. James was there, but not the way she remembered him. He was strapped to one of the mechanical beasts, his face pale and frozen in a look of terror, his eyes wide and unblinking. His body was bent at unnatural angles, as if his very soul had been contorted by the horrors of the carnival. "James!" Sarah cried, rushing toward him. But before she could reach him, the ride lurched to life. The skeletal figures began to spin faster and faster, their twisted bodies jerking in unison, their hollow eyes staring straight through her. "James!" Sarah screamed again, but his mouth moved in response, not with words, but with a grin too wide, too unnatural, stretching far past the limits of human anatomy. The ringmaster's laughter echoed around her, filling the entire clearing. "Your precious James is no longer your own," the ringmaster said. "He is part of the show now, like all the others." Sarah backed away, her chest tightening with terror. "No! No! This can't be happening! James, fight it! Please fight it!" But it was too late. James' body was no longer his own, his soul bound to the carnival's twisted ride. His eyes, once filled with love and fear, were now empty, blank, hollow. He was trapped in the carnival, just like all the others before him. She turned and ran, her heart breaking. The carnival was playing with them, toying with their deepest fears. But she wasn't going to let it claim her too. Sarah stumbled through the maze, the fog closing in around her, the whispers growing louder and louder. The carnival was alive, and it was feeding on them. The faces of the other trapped souls, those once lost to the maze, flashed in her mind. They were all there, part of the twisted game. She couldn't allow herself to become one of them. Finally, she emerged from the fog. Before her stood a towering structure, the Ferris wheel, its lights flickering in the night, casting long shadows. It seemed to pulse with a life of its own. The ringmaster stood at the base of it, his grin widening. "Only one way out, Sarah," he said, his voice a taunt. "Ride the Ferris wheel, but be warned. What you see at the top will either break you or set you free." Sarah's pulse raced as she looked at the wheel. It was so massive, so overwhelming. Could she really trust him? Could she survive whatever awaited her at the top? The wheel began to turn, slowly at first, then picking up speed. The seats creaked as they swung higher into the night sky. "You can leave," the ringmaster said, "but only if you're willing to make the ultimate choice. Sacrifice yourself, or become the ringmaster yourself." Sarah stood at the base of the wheel, her heart racing. The game was almost over, and the choice she made now would determine her fate, whether she escaped or became part of the carnival's eternal cycle of torment. The Ferris wheel creaked and groaned as it began its slow, relentless climb, each movement of the massive structure accompanied by a jarring, metallic screech. Sarah's legs felt weak, and her heart hammered in her chest. The carnival had become a surreal nightmare, each twist and turn pulling her deeper into its sickening, demonic grip. The ringmaster's voice echoed in the night air, a low, unsettling chuckle that sent a ripple of dread through her. "Every soul that enters this place is bound by one simple truth. Fear is the ticket, but to leave, you must pay the price." Her eyes moved up to the wheel's towering height. The cars at the top hung suspended, dark shapes against the night sky, spinning slowly as though they were waiting for something, for someone. Each car seemed to harbor a terrible secret, souls lost to the carnival, forever bound in its endless cycle of torment. As the wheel jerked upward, she gripped the edge of the car, her knuckles turning white. She could hear the carnival's eerie music below, still playing that distorted melody that twisted in the wind, too sweet, too cruel. Her mind raced with thoughts of James. She had seen him, her beloved, once vibrant and alive, now trapped in the carnival's unending nightmare. He had become part of the show, no longer her partner, but a puppet in the hands of the carnival's demons. And now she was faced with an impossible choice. She could surrender herself, offer herself as the carnival's newest attraction, one of the trapped souls that would forever wander the dark, twisted maze. Or she could make an attempt to escape, risking the unknown, the impossible. But there was no way to know if freedom was even real. The Ferris wheel groaned again, the sound growing louder. It felt like a warning. She had no idea how much longer she would be able to hold on. Her body was shaking, but she forced herself to take a deep breath, trying to steady her nerves. At the top of the Ferris wheel, everything fell silent. The carnival below seemed far away, as though she were suspended in some strange void between dimensions. Sarah's breath caught in her throat as she saw something move across the sky, a flicker of shadow that seemed to shift with the breeze, moving across the moon like a dark cloud. And then it was gone. The ringmaster appeared before her at the top, his twisted grin wider than ever. "It's time for the final act, Sarah," he said, his voice smooth, coaxing. "The choice is yours. You can join the show. You can take your place beside all the others, forever part of my carnival. Or you can choose to leave. But remember this, once you make the choice, there's no going back. You will either ascend or fall." For a moment, Sarah stood frozen. The wind howled around her, whipping through her hair. She looked down at the carnival below, the dark, twisted forms of the lost souls wandering aimlessly, their eyes hollow, their bodies broken. She thought of James, how he had become one of them, how the carnival had taken everything from him, how the ringmaster had made a mockery of them both. "No," she whispered under her breath, tears streaming down her face. I won't become like them. The ringmaster's smile faltered just for a second before he regained his composure. You think you can escape, Sarah? No one escapes. Not from me. Not from the carnival. Sarah's breath quickened as she stepped forward, her hand trembling as she reached out to the wheel. Her fingers brushed against the cold metal, and for the briefest moment, she felt a strange pulse, a dark energy coursing through her body. It was the carnival itself, trying to pull her in, trying to claim her. But something inside of her snapped. Something fierce and unyielding, something that refused to bow to the darkness. I won't be your puppet, she said, her voice steady despite the fear bubbling inside her. The carnival seemed to tremble, as if hearing her defiance for the first time in centuries. Very well, the ringmaster replied, his tone now cold and final. You think you can escape? Fine. But remember this, your soul is mine, and the game is never truly over. With those words he vanished, the wind suddenly picking up and sweeping the last vestiges of his presence away. The Ferris wheel began to shake violently, throwing Sarah off balance. She cried out as the car dipped and tilted, the world around her spinning faster and faster. The carnival's twisted, grotesque music started up again, louder than before, as though every distorted note was an iron fist hammering against her mind. James! She screamed, her voice cracking, but there was no reply. He was lost. He was gone. There was no way to bring him back. Suddenly, the car swung out of control, jerking violently. Sarah's body was thrown against the side, and for a moment she was suspended in midair, her feet hanging dangerously over the edge. The darkness below seemed to stretch on forever, a black abyss threatening to swallow her whole. And then she felt it, an overwhelming, crushing force. It was the carnival, pulling her down, dragging her into its endless cycle. The ground below seemed to pulse, breathing like a living creature, waiting to devour her whole. But Sarah fought back. She dug her fingers into the edge of the Ferris wheel and held on for dear life, the wind howling in her ears. She wasn't going to let it win. Not now. Not after everything she had been through. With every ounce of strength she could muster, Sarah pulled herself back into the car, her muscles screaming in pain. She looked down at the carnival below, the twisted lights flickering like 1,000 eyes watching her every move. The carnival was alive. The ringmaster was right. She could feel its heartbeat in her bones, its power in her veins. But she could also feel something else, a small burning light inside her, a flicker of defiance, the will to live. She had a choice, she realized, a real choice. The Ferris wheel began to slow, the eerie mechanical sound gradually fading. The carnival below fell into a strange, unsettling silence. The twisted lights dimmed, their glow no longer so blinding. But Sarah knew something was wrong. It was too quiet. The carnival had gone silent, but she didn't trust it. Something was waiting. Something was about to happen. Then, the ringmaster's voice echoed once more, but it wasn't a taunt this time. It was a final command. You can't escape, Sarah. You've made your choice. Before Sarah could react, the ground beneath her feet gave way. The Ferris wheel shattered, pieces of metal and wood splintering in all directions as the entire structure collapsed into the darkness below. And then there was only darkness, absolute suffocating darkness. When Sarah opened her eyes again, she was no longer in the Ferris wheel. She was standing in the middle of the carnival grounds. The air was thick with fog, the lights flickering erratically, casting long shadows that seemed to move on their own. She could hear the distant, hollow laughter of the ringmaster. She was back in the carnival that had never really let her go. Her body was cold, her limbs heavy. She felt different. Something had changed. She had survived. But at what cost? A shadow moved across the ground, and she looked up to see the ringmaster standing before her. His smile was no longer just a grin. It was a victorious, mocking sneer. "Welcome back," he said, his voice dripping with malice. "You thought you could escape? You thought you could defy me?" Sarah's heart sank as she looks around. The carnival hadn't changed. It was still the same nightmare, the same twisted reality. "You never leave," the ringmaster continued, his smile growing wider. "Once you enter, you belong to the show, forever." Sarah's pulse raced. She tried to move, to scream, but no sound came out. She looked around, desperately searching for a way out. But it was hopeless. She was trapped. The carnival had claimed her. And as she turned to face the ringmaster, she realized the truth. There was no escape. Not for her, not for anyone. The show was never truly over. It was just another foggy evening on the shores of Michigan's Great Lakes. The kind of evening that wraps itself in a thick blanket of mist, where the air feels colder than it should, and the water laps at the dock with a whispering rhythm, like an old friend calling from the depths. Those who lived near the lake knew its moods, its calm, its fury, and on the rarest of nights its strange stillness that seemed to hold something more beneath the surface. But there was something else, something newer, darker, that had started creeping into the whispered conversations of the locals. The Wraith of the Deep. No one knew exactly when it had first appeared, or when the stories had started, but over time, the legend of the ghost ship had become something more than just a tale. It was a warning, something that even the most seasoned sailors hesitated to talk about, especially after the sun had dipped beneath the horizon. A ghost ship said to sail in the mist, its outline barely visible, its sails ghostly and torn, its decks empty of life but full of the souls of those lost to the lake's bottomless depths. Those who had been brave enough or foolish enough to follow its spectral glow were never seen again, gone without a trace. The lake swallowed them whole, and the only remnants were a faint, eerie glow drifting silently across the waters, a beacon, an invitation, or perhaps a trap. In the small, weathered town of Blackwood Point, just on the edge of the lake's vast expanse, the stories were far from mere ghost tales. The few who had dared to venture near the lake at night after hearing the rumors knew something was lurking out there in the fog, waiting, and one of them was about to come face to face with it. Isaac Warren hadn't believed in ghosts, at least not until that night. The salty, biting wind had tousled his dark hair as he stood at the edge of the old pier, peering out into the thick fog that rolled in off the water like a creeping blanket, swallowing everything in its path. He could hardly see the end of the pier, let alone the vast lake that stretched out beyond. The world, in this moment, was reduced to nothing more than the faint sound of water and the muffled thrum of his heartbeat. He had lived in Blackwood Point all his life, working as a fisherman and repairing boats on the side. Stories of the Wraith were nothing new. It had been the talk of the town for decades, a myth, a legend, a reminder of the deep, dark forces that lurked just beyond the horizon. But Isaac had heard something else, something that no one else had dared to admit. There were whispers of a ship, a real one, or so it seemed. He had heard the rumors from the few old sailors still in town. Some of them swore they'd seen it, the wraith, glowing on the water like some kind of spectral mirage. It had been enough to send shivers down his spine, but it wasn't the stuff of ghost stories. No, the strange thing that Isaac couldn't shake was the hope that gnawed at him every time he heard those whispers, a hope that had begun to take root when he first heard about the ship from an old bedridden man at the local inn. The man had been rambling about an old map, one that detailed the location of the Wraith's last known sightings, its eerie path through the fog. The map had been passed down through generations, he claimed, but the man's words were cryptic, and Isaac had to dig deeper. He had to see it for himself, and maybe, just maybe, uncover its mystery. Isaac spent the next few days scouring the town for any trace of the old map, the one that could lead him to the ship, but every lead came up empty, and each old sailor he approached dismissed his questions with a mixture of pity and fear, as though they believed asking about the wraith could bring its attention to them. Despite the warnings, Isaac couldn't let go of the pull. The more the town tried to convince him to drop it, the more determined he became. That evening, as the sun sank below the horizon, painting the sky in blood-red streaks, Isaac stood by the pier once more. The lake before him was eerily calm, the surface like glass, reflecting the fiery hues of the sunset. But something wasn't right. The air was colder than usual, and a thick fog, unlike any Isaac had ever seen, began to roll in. It wasn't just a mist. It was as though the fog itself was alive, curling around his legs and creeping up the pier. Isaac shivered, his instincts urging him to turn back to the warmth of his cabin. But then he saw it. At first, he thought it might be the lighthouse at the far end of the lake, but it was too faint, too erratic. It flickered like a dying flame, dancing just above the water. It wasn't the steady pulse of a lighthouse beam. It was something far more unsettling. Isaac took a step forward, his heartbeat quickening. The fog seemed to shift and churn, swallowing the glow and spitting it out again. The glow was closer now, much closer. And then, through the fog, Isaac made out the outline of a ship. His breath caught in his throat as the faint image of the vessel took shape. It was massive, its silhouette towering over the water like some spectral leviathan. The sails were torn, and the hull seemed to shimmer with an otherworldly light. Isaac's pulse pounded in his ears as his feet moved almost of their own accord. Isaac grabbed a lantern from a nearby post and hurried down the wooden dock toward the old fishing boat he kept moored at the edge. It was a small, unassuming vessel, far from equipped to chase down a ghost ship, but it was all he had. The fog thickened as he pushed off the dock, the boat creaking as it cut through the water. The eerie glow in the distance guided him, and he steered toward it, barely able to make out the outline of the ship through the dense mist. The closer he got, the colder the air grew, until his breath fogged up in front of his face, despite the late summer heat. Isaac's eyes widened as he approached the spectral ship, the wraith of the deep. He couldn't deny it now. The stories were true. but there was something else, a deep, unsettling silence. The water, usually teeming with life, was still as a graveyard. No fish jumped, no ripples disturbed the surface. It was as if everything around the ship was holding its breath. Isaac reached out toward the ship's bow, the distant light now flickering so brightly it almost seemed to pulse. He was close, just a few more yards, and he'd be on it. But as his fingers brushed the boat's edge, the light vanished. He froze. The ship, which had once seemed so full of life, was now a void, its shadow looming over him like the hand of something ancient. He strained his eyes, but it was gone. A cold wind whistled through the air. It felt like a warning. Isaac reached into the boat's small cabin for the map, fumbling with it in the dark. He unfolded it carefully, his heart racing. There was a large X drawn over a section near the middle of the lake, right where the glow had been. This was no coincidence. The map had led him here, and now the ship had vanished. The night passed in a blur. Isaac returned to shore, his mind buzzing with questions and doubt. Had he imagined it? Was it some trick of the fog or his overactive imagination? But he knew better. There was no mistaking what he had seen. The ship, or whatever it was real. The following morning, Isaac gathered his things and set out to find more answers. He visited the inn again, where the bedridden man had spoken of the cursed ship. The man was gone now, disappeared during the night, leaving behind only an empty room and a faint trace of the strange, musky scent that had always hung around him. The locals refused to talk, but one old fisherman, visibly shaking, finally broke his silence. "It's not just a ship," the man whispered, his voice hoarse. "There's something about the lake itself, something that calls you. It makes you see things, forces you to want to get closer, and when you do, when you step onto its deck, it takes you, body and soul. You become part of it." Isaac felt a chill run down his spine. "What do you mean? Who's been taken?" The fisherman hesitated before answering, his eyes darting nervously to the windows, as though he feared something was watching. "The last I saw, there was a group of treasure hunters, young, eager. They followed the glow, just like you. That was a year ago, never came back." Isaac's blood ran cold. These weren't just stories, there was a pattern. The wraith didn't appear at random. It called to the living. But why? What was it that the ship sought? And what fate awaited those who stepped aboard? That night, Isaac couldn't sleep. The image of the ship haunted his every thought. The memories of its eerie glow seared into his mind. He had to find out what was happening, what had happened to those lost souls. There was only one way forward. He had to board the ship. Before dawn, Isaac made his preparations. He packed enough supplies to last him a few days and set out once more toward the water, his heart heavy with both dread and determination. This time there would be no turning back. As he approached the dock, the mist greeted him again, thick, suffocating. The glow wasn't visible yet, but he knew it would come. The ship would rise from the depths again, and he would be ready. The fog had thickened by the time Isaac launched his boat into the waters again. The cold was gnawing at his skin, but the terror that had gripped his heart from the first moment he saw the wraith was far colder. This was no longer just a legend. The boat rocked gently in the thick mist as Isaac took a deep breath, his eyes scanning the water for any sign of the ship, and then, as if summoned by his thoughts, The eerie glow appeared once more, flickering through the fog like the fading light of a lighthouse on the edge of the world. Isaac's hands trembled as he steered the boat toward it. This time, there was no hesitation. The glow intensified with each passing moment, and as he approached the spot where the wraith had been before, his heart raced. The ship was there. It had always been there, waiting. The closer he got, the more the eerie silence enveloped him. The world had gone still. Even the waves seemed to surrender to the ship's strange power, their rhythmic lapping gone, leaving only an unnatural stillness. The distant hum of the boat's engine sounded hollow against the thick, damp air. The wraith materialized out of the fog like some dark god from the depths. Its towering masts loomed above him, each one draped in tattered, ghostly sails. The ship was alive with a low, creaking groan that resonated through Isaac's chest. He felt it in his bones, a presence that went beyond the ship itself. The wraith was not just a ship, it was a prison. Isaac felt his gut twist as he pulled the boat alongside the ship's massive hull. For a moment he hesitated. The ghostly figure of the ship beckoned him forward, and yet some primal part of him screamed to turn back. "Step aboard, Isaac Warren," a voice whispered through the mist. It was faint at first, like a murmur barely carried by the wind, but the name, his name, sent a shiver down his spine. Isaac's heart skipped a beat as the words seemed to echo in his mind, coming from every direction. He had no choice. The pull of the ship was undeniable. It wasn't a matter of will. It was as if the ship had already claimed him, and now he was simply following the inevitable course. Isaac tied the boat to the ship's side and, with a deep breath, stepped onto the cold, damp planks of the wraith's deck. The moment his boots touched the wood, the ship creaked and groaned as though it had come alive, sensing his presence. His skin prickled, and his breath caught in his throat. The ship seemed to be breathing. There was no sound except the dull creaking of the ship and the slow, rhythmic thumping of Isaac's heart. He stood there, feeling the oppressive weight of the fog pressing in on him, as if the world had been reduced to nothing but this ship. The deck was vast and empty. The sails hung limply like rotting shrouds. Isaac's lantern swung gently in his hand, casting long, stretching shadows that seemed to dance with a mind of their own. He walked forward, drawn by an invisible force. Each step he took felt heavier than the last, as if the ship itself were resisting his movement. The smell of mildew and rot grew stronger the farther he went, and a cold chill settled into his bones. It was then that he heard it, a soft sound, like a whisper, a name, Isaac. The voice was clearer now, closer. It came from the shadows just ahead, faint but unmistakable. Isaac paused. His eyes darted around the dark corners of the ship, searching for the source. There was no one, only the endless shadows stretching out in all directions. The voice came again, this time accompanied by a soft, echoing scrape, like fingernails running across old wood. A chill ran down his spine as he turned toward the sound. From the darkness emerged a figure, tall, gaunt, and shimmering in the dim light. It was a man, though not quite. His form flickered like a shadow, his features indistinct, yet Isaac could feel the weight of his gaze upon him. "You've come for answers," the figure said, his voice distant, tinged with an unnatural hollow echo. "But answers come at a price." Isaac's pulse quickened. "What is this place? Why are you here?" The figure tilted its head slightly, its face still obscured in shadow. "We are the lost. We are the damned." A deep guttural sound rumbled from the ship's depths, like something stirring beneath the floorboards. The shadows around Isaac seemed to breathe, in and out, in sync with the heartbeat of the ship. Isaac's chest tightened as the figure stepped closer, its cold breath brushing against his face. "You must leave. You do not belong here." But it was too late. The fog had thickened around the ship, and Isaac felt the ship moving beneath him, shuddering, creaking as if it were about to set sail. He could hear faint whispers in the air, voices of the lost souls who had boarded before him. They were all around him now, their anguished cries a chorus of misery. Isaac felt something brush against his ankle. He looked down to see a shimmering hand reaching up from the floorboards, translucent and cold, grasping for him. "Help us." The voice was barely a whisper, but it vibrated through Isaac's bones. Isaac stumbled backward, heart pounding. The figure was gone now, replaced by 100 others, each face hollow, eyes wide with terror, mouths agape as if pleading for release. The realization struck him like a thunderclap. The Wraith wasn't just a ship, it was a prison for the souls of the damned. And Isaac was about to become its next inmate. Isaac tried to run, but the ship seemed to shift and warp around him. The corridors stretched out impossibly long, and every turn he took only brought him back to the same spot. It was as if the ship had no end, no escape. The mist had swallowed the deck entirely now, and the cold was unbearable. He could feel the ship tightening around him, suffocating him. His chest felt heavy, as though the weight of the ship's ancient curse was pressing down on him, binding him to its fate. And then he saw it, the center of the ship, the heart. It was a massive pulsing structure at the ship's core, a dark pulsing mass of shadows and light, surrounded by ghostly figures who circled it in an eternal dance. Their eyes locked onto Isaac's as he approached, their faces frozen in expressions of terror and desperation. The heart of the Wraith, Isaac realized, was not just a source of the ship's power. It was its very essence. The spirits that lingered here were not merely trapped. They were feeding it, binding themselves to it in an endless cycle of torment. Isaac felt the ship's will take hold of him. The voices of the lost souls grew louder, urging him to step closer, to let the heart claim him. His hand trembled as he reached out toward the pulsating mass. But a sudden, violent surge of realization hit him like a shockwave. This was his choice. Isaac had come seeking answers, but in doing so, he had walked into the heart of the storm. The ship would either claim him, body and soul, or he would find a way to break the curse and escape. With a surge of adrenaline, Isaac ripped his hand away from the heart, stumbling backward. The ship groaned as if displeased with his resistance. The souls around him shrieked, their voices merging into a cacophony of anguish. Isaac's feet scrambled over the creaking floorboards, his body lurching backward as the cold, suffocating air of the Wraith seemed to pull him toward the heart. The ship groaned with an ancient, malignant hunger, the souls around him rising, their hands outstretched, desperate to drag him into the pulsating core of the ship. His heart raced in his chest, the screams of the damned filling his ears. Each step he took to retreat felt as though the ship was pressing back harder, as though the very walls were closing in around him. He could no longer hear his own thoughts, only the cries of the lost souls reverberating through the timber of the ship's decks. Isaac stumbled toward the exit, toward the stairs that led back to the deck. But the moment he turned, the ship shifted. The passage disappeared. There was no way out. The wraith was alive, alive with a terrible, insatiable hunger. And now it had claimed him. For a fleeting moment, Isaac's mind cleared. He realized that all the warnings, the whispers in the fog, the chilling pleas from the figures he had seen, had led him to this point. The ship had been waiting for him, watching him, pulling him in like a hunter stalking its prey. It had known he would come, and now Isaac understood the truth. The wraith wasn't just a ship, it was a prison of souls, but it was also a gateway to something far worse. His breath came in shallow gasps as the shadows of the ship deepened, swirling around him. The heart pulsed like a sickening organ, its rhythm matching the pounding in his chest. His legs felt weak, but he couldn't stop moving. He had to break free, somehow. His mind raced. There had to be a way. There had to be a reason this ship existed, a way to end its curse. And then he saw it. Through the shadows of the deck, there was a figure standing at the far end, a tall, slender form, flickering in and out of sight like a fading memory. Isaac's heart skipped a beat. It was the figure he had seen earlier, the one who had warned him, but now there was something different about it. The figure was no longer just a shadow. It was solid, corporeal, its eyes staring directly at Isaac with a sadness that reached deep into his soul. The figure spoke. Its voice was soft, but unmistakable. "You are not the first to seek escape." Isaac's voice barely broke through the oppressive silence as he gasped. "What do you mean? Who are you?" The figure's hollow eyes seemed to pierce Isaac's very being. "I was once like you," the figure said. "I came seeking answers. I thought I could find a way to free them, to free myself. But there is no freedom. There is only the wraith, and once you step aboard, you become part of it." Isaac felt a cold surge of dread. Number I refused to accept that. "I will not become one of you. I will find a way out." The figure's expression softened. "You cannot, not unless you understand the truth. The wraith is not just a ship, Isaac. It is bound to the very lake itself. It is an entity that feeds off the souls of the lost, and once it has taken you, it will never let go." Isaac's heart raced. The figure stepped forward, its form flickering, unstable. "The wraith lives. It is alive with the souls of the dead. It exists to lure the living into its grasp. Those who are called by it, they are not merely lost, they are consumed. The lake, it is the source of its power. And now, you are the ship's next soul." Isaac recoiled, but the figure reached out, its ghostly hand gripping Isaac's arm, pulling him closer. "There is a way to escape, but it requires a sacrifice, a terrible choice. You must face the heart, Isaac. You must destroy it." Isaac stared at the figure, confusion and terror gripping him. Destroy the heart? But how? The figure's eyes filled with sorrow. "The heart is the source of the ship's power. If it is destroyed, the ship will die. The curse will end. But the wraith cannot be destroyed by any normal means. It is not merely wooden sails. It is the soul of the lake, a spirit of the water. You must sacrifice your own soul, Isaac. Only then will you break the ship's hold over you." Isaac felt a cold weight in his chest. The figure was asking him to give up everything, to throw away his own life to end the suffering of countless others. The ship would not let him go, and if he stayed, he would become part of it, trapped forever in its endless journey through the fog. "Do you understand now?" the figure asked, its voice barely a whisper. "There is no other way. The Wraith will claim you, just as it has claimed all those before you." Isaac closed his eyes, feeling the weight of the decision settle upon him. The Wraith was alive, and so long as it existed, more souls would be drawn to it, more would be lost, just like him. The only way to stop it was to destroy it, but at what cost? He turned toward the heart, which pulsed with dark, malevolent energy. His legs moved on their own accord, drawn to the terrible mass that seemed to call him. With each step, the air around him grew colder. The cries of the lost souls echoed in his ears, urging him to turn back, but Isaac knew there was no other choice. He reached the heart. The pulse of energy was overwhelming, pressing against his mind, his spirit. The shadows were thick, alive with the presence of the damned. Isaac's hand trembled as he reached for the heart. Feeling its dark power course through his fingers, he had to do this, for the souls trapped here, for his own salvation. His voice broke the silence as he whispered a single word: "Goodbye." He placed his hand upon the heart. The moment his hand made contact with the pulsing core of the ship, a blast of cold and light engulfed Isaac. His body was torn apart by an explosion of pain, his soul feeling as though it were being wrenched from his body. The ship screamed, a deafening wail that shook the very air around him. The last thing Isaac saw was the figure, standing on the edge of the ship, watching him with those sad, hollow eyes. And then, everything went dark. Everything was dark. Isaac could feel the cold, the oppressive weight of the ship, pressing in on him, but it was different now. The voices of the lost souls had fallen silent. He could no longer hear their anguished cries, nor could he feel the ship's pulse, its heartbeat. Had he succeeded? But the silence was not a comfort. It was an unnatural stillness. The cold clung to his skin like a second skin, and for a long moment Isaac thought he might be dead, his soul ripped from his body, forever trapped within the cursed wraith. But then, a sound, a faint familiar murmur. "Isaac." It was a whisper, but this time, it wasn't the souls of the damned reaching out. It was something else, something deeper, a voice that seemed to come from the very water beneath him. "Isaac, you have done it." The voice was soft, but it vibrated with an ancient primal force. It was the voice of the lake, of the wraith itself. Isaac's eyes fluttered open. He was no longer standing on the ship's deck. Instead, he was floating, weightless, as if suspended in a void of cold and darkness. The heart of the ship, the heart of the deep, pulsed before him, an endless abyss, a swirling vortex of shadows and light, as if the ship itself were both alive and dying at once. The heart had been severed from the ship. Isaac realized that the sacrifice wasn't just physical. It was his very will that had severed the wraith from its power. By reaching out to the heart, he had become part of it, part of the lake's dark energy. The wraith had been tied to him in that instant. The ship, the lake, the curse, they all now depended on him. "You freed them," the voice murmured. But at what cost? Isaac tried to speak, but no words came. It felt like his mouth had been sealed shut, his body turned to stone. There was a weight pressing on his chest, heavy and suffocating. A vision flashed before his eyes. He saw the crew, the souls trapped on the ship for centuries. Faces flickered past him, anguished and desperate. Sailors, travelers, adventurers. Each of them had once been like him, seeking answers, drawn to the ship by the whispering winds of the Wraith. You freed them. Isaac felt the weight of their presence, the countless souls he had freed by confronting the heart. But in doing so, he had taken on the ship's curse for himself. He had become the Wraith, bound to the lake's endless cycle. He was the vessel now. The lake, the heart of the Wraith, was feeding on him, and he could feel the power of the spirits, the pull of the ship's curse now inside him, like a living thing, moving beneath his skin. The ship had been destroyed, but the lake's hunger could never be truly quenched. The cycle would repeat. The Wraith has been severed, the voice whispered again, but now it sounded distant, fading, like a memory slipping through the cracks. You have freed them, but not yourself. Isaac's body felt as if it were sinking into the very depths of the lake. His chest constricted, his thoughts became heavy, clouded. He realized that he could not escape, not completely. The ship had claimed his soul in the end, and now it was part of him, just as it had claimed the others before him. Suddenly the pain stopped. The weight on his chest disappeared. He was no longer in the void, but back in the heart of the Wraith, surrounded by the tormented souls of the lost. Their faces, ghostly hollow, stared at him from the shadows, their eyes full of sorrow, anger, and pain. And yet, there was something else there too. Hope. Isaac, a voice whispered again, this time full of compassion. It was a familiar voice, the same figure who had warned him. Isaac looked up, and through the fog, he saw the figure standing there, tall and ethereal, glowing softly. It was the same soul he had encountered earlier, the one who had tried to warn him. You freed us, the figure said softly. You freed us all. Isaac shook his head, his voice hoarse. But I'm still here. I'm part of the ship now. The figure stepped forward, its face full of grief. No, Isaac. The ship is no longer alive. The Wraith has been broken. You have freed us, but you must free yourself. Isaac's vision began to blur. His body felt weak, but he could still feel the ship's curse tugging at him. The ship was dying, but it wanted to pull him into its depths. Isaac knew that his choice had consequences. By breaking the Wraith's power, he had changed the very nature of the curse. He could no longer simply walk away. How? Isaac gasped. How do I break free? The figure's voice was faint, but full of purpose. You must sever your own tie to the ship. Destroy the anchor that holds you here. The Wraith is a part of the lake. You must let the lake have its own peace. Isaac stared at the figure, understanding slowly dawning. The ship had fed off the souls of the damned. It had fed off their sacrifices. To end the curse once and for all, he had to sever his own connection to the lake. He had to destroy the final anchor, the part of the Wraith that had been created by the damned, and that meant giving up what was left of him. Isaac stepped forward, his heart heavy with understanding. He knew now what had to be done. He could hear the whispers growing louder again, but this time they were no longer pleading. They were thanking him. He moved toward the heart, which was now glowing faintly, a dying ember, struggling to hold on to life. And as he reached out for it, the darkness swallowed him whole. As the last remnants of the ship crumbled, the souls of the lost, including Isaac's, were freed. The lake became still again. The mist began to lift. and the last trace of the wraith faded into history, leaving only a faint echo in the depths. The small town by the lake awoke to an unusual calm the next morning. The fog had cleared, and the lake was still, as if nothing had ever disturbed it. No one knew what had happened to Isaac Warren or the other souls who had come before him, but in the distance, out on the water, the faintest glow flickered for a moment, before disappearing completely. Some say the wraith will return. Others believe it has finally been silenced forever. But deep in the waters of Michigan's Great Lakes, the truth remains hidden, waiting for the next soul to hear its call.